Okay, hello ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Grand Theatre and the second annual Aristotle Foundation debate. I'm Mark Milkey, founder and president of the Aristotle Foundation for Public Policy, and I will be your moderator. The Aristotle Foundation is a public policy think tank. As an educational charity, we champion reason, democracy, and civilization in Canada. We began public operations in 2023. The Aristotle Foundation is supported by charitable donations. So, to find out more and support our work, please click on aristotlefoundation.org. As to why reason, democracy, and civilization, briefly, it's not reasonable to compare Canada's founders, such as Sir John A. Macdonald, to the worst tyrants in history.
Hear, hear.
Or even to mention them in the same breath. In fact, despite all their imperfections, just as we are imperfect today, the founders of this country, including the pre-Confederation British, French, and the earliest inhabitants, we now call Indigenous, helped set the stage and helped create a new nation on the cold northern half of North America, perhaps emphasis on cold. That was not easy. Canada is the result of classic English ideas from the Magna Carta forward and also French ideas of liberty. They include notions of property rights, freedom, democracy, responsible government, and more. Those ideas would, by the mid-20th century, lead to a nation that was mostly free and flourishing. Note I said mostly free and flourishing. And that was in positive comparison to most of humanity and most of history, where, as the philosopher Thomas Hobbes described it, most people lived lives that were described as nasty, brutish, and short. In short, it is reasonable, the first part of our slogan or logo, to assert and remember that those ideas and our earliest founders helped make Canada possible and freedom possible. Democracy. It's easier to solve problems if you can talk about what the problems are and potential remedies, which these two gentlemen will obviously do tonight. That's why free expression and, dare I say it, referendums are a good way to explore tough public policy issues. The Swiss practice safe referendums, and nobody thinks they're crazy. And of course, debates such as these are integral to a healthy, functioning democracy. It's one reason we are hosting this debate tonight and are proud to do so. Lastly, civilization. It's an old-fashioned word which we need to renew in modern-day life. Here's one example of uncivilized behavior. We could be here all night describing uncivilized behavior, but let me give you one example. A few years ago, I read a news article about the city of Cranbrook. This has been videotaped. Not everyone in Canada will know where Cranbrook is, but most of you in the audience will. Small city in British Columbia. Apparently some gang members a couple of years ago started a fight in the city, and then some of them ended up in the hospital where they restarted the fight among the doctors and nurses who were trying to help them. That's not civilized behavior. It's not the British Columbia I grew up in, it's not the Canada I grew up in or we grew up in. Civilization may be an old-fashioned word, but it's fragile and it needs to be renewed. So reason, democracy, and civilization matter. It's why we set up the Aristotle Foundation. As to the name, you might guess this, but the philosopher Aristotle asserted that reality and reason matter to solving problems. Ancient Greece, of course, was an incubator for experiments in democracy. Athenian citizens debated justice and the good life. All such elements, reason, democracy, and civilization, yet matter to human flourishing today, to the good life today. So, at the Aristotle Foundation, our scholars and staff ask, what are the modern threats to a sane, safe, and flourishing country? What does the good life look like for all of us today? And then we get to work on issues that range from identity politics to Canadian history to radicalism. And our positive vision for Canada is thus this. We are a national think tank, and I'll explain why we've got this debate motion tonight as a national think tank. But our positive vision for Canada is this. A Canada where the sacrifices and successes of past generations are cherished and built upon, where citizens value each other based on character and merit, and where open inquiry and free expression are prized as the best path to a flourishing future for all. Now to the debate. Given what I just outlined about the origins of the Aristotle Foundation, we should be clear, and you could have guessed this, a national think tank, that we aim to renew Canada. We have thousands of financial supporters from coast to coast. Our email list now numbers in the tens of thousands. Many of you picked up the book on the way in that we published. It was our first book 3 years ago. The 1867 Project, Why Canada Should Be Cherished, Not Cancelled. Bit of a pushback on cancel culture in the country that's been around for 10, 15 years or longer. It was an Amazon bestseller. We sold 13,000 copies to date, which for a book in Canada is quite good, especially for a think tank. So we're very proud of that book. So why a debate and a resolution about the West's role in Confederation, though our panelists tonight will also obviously bring in Alberta. First, as per the point about democracy, healthy debates help citizens think through and settle disputes peacefully. Second, there are real issues driving Western grievances, including in the province where the three of us now live, Alberta. And some of the separatist sentiments have evolved from the same. I'm a born and raised Western Canadian. I was born in Kelowna, and I've spent much of my life and career in both Alberta and British Columbia. My Canada includes the West, and I have to remind people in the rest of the country, when they forget, and sometimes some do, that of what we accomplish out here in Western Canada, which is a lot. I've personally been associated with various think tanks and advocacy groups over the years, over the decades, and I've written on almost every aspect of the West and the annoyances out here. And I've written on them frankly. Be they badly designed equalization programs. I'm not sure I'd want the equalization program if we could get rid of it at all. But I've written about that. I've written about interference in the resource industry. Jason actually hired me for the war room. Well, sort of hired me through the then president. And I've written about the suppression of free expression, the underrepresentation of selected Western provinces in Parliament, and more. So that's the second reason. There are real issues driving Western grievances, whether one is a separatist or not. And third, why the West, not just Alberta, for this debate? Well, in part because this will be seen nationally, and I wanted to bring in the other provinces and the concerns that are in some of the other Western provinces. And polling across the West indicates some support for separatism. Low in some provinces like Manitoba and BC, but the numbers, at least the ones I've seen over the past year, indicate that at the high end, support for separation is at 12% in Manitoba, 20% in British Columbia, 33% in Saskatchewan, and about 36% in Alberta, according to one poll. Angus Regis came up with a poll again today, which pegged Alberta at about a third. So that's been constant. And both gentlemen will discuss the reasons for that. Irritations in the West also extend beyond Alberta. I mentioned I grew up in British Columbia. I had already moved to Alberta in 1992 by the time of the Charlottetown Accord, and I heartily voted against it. Irritation in British Columbia with aspects of the Charlottetown Accord and proposals for special status for Quebec, among others, drove British Columbians to vote against the Charlottetown Accord by a margin of 68%. That was the no vote for the Charlottetown Accord. Higher than in Alberta at 60%, higher than in Quebec at 56%. So that's why we decided to include the West, at least in the title of this debate. But again, the two gentlemen will perhaps pivot back and forth between the West and Alberta. The two gentlemen you will hear from tonight will talk about some of these issues, and that's why we are here to debate. Here's how we will proceed. I will introduce the debaters very shortly. They will proceed with opening statements each of 10 minutes, and then they will respond to each other with a 2-minute rebuttal. We will then spend 30 minutes where I ask each debater some specific questions for them, and the other debater can respond if they choose. 2 minutes and then 1 minute is the hope. At the end, each debater will have 5 minutes for their closing statement. Now, lastly, some tips for you, the audience, and the media. We're asking you not to video or live stream the debate. We have a photographer and videographer, and this debate should be released within a couple of days. We hope by the weekend at the latest on our website, aristotlefoundation.org. And we want to ensure the quality tonight of the video is superb. So feel free to clap and cheer, but please no interjections from the audience. I know all of us have opinions, we like to share them, but that's why God created ornery uncles and the internet. The resolution. Be it resolved, the West should stay in Canada. And now to our debaters. Arguing against the resolution, I'll give you their full biography, well, their partial biography, and then we'll go to the first debater. Mr. Keith Wilson, King's Counsel. Keith Wilson is a prominent Alberta lawyer, on my right here, with a practice focused on constitutional, regulatory, and property rights law. He began his career with the Alberta Farmers Advocate Office. where he developed a strong grounding in the functioning of the Alberta government, as well as in rural and agricultural issues. Over the years, Mr. Wilson has been involved in significant legal and policy matters representing individuals and industry participants in disputes involving environmental impacts, energy development, and government regulation. His work has also extended into constitutional litigation and public advocacy. A frequent speaker and commentator, Mr. Wilson is known for his advocacy in support of Alberta independence. Arguing for the resolution on my left, the Honourable Jason Kenney. Jason Kenney was the last leader of the Alberta Progressive Conservative Party before that party merged with the Wild Rose to form the United Conservative Party. He was the leader of the UCP from 2017 until 2022 and served as the 18th Premier of Alberta. He also served as the member of the Legislative Assembly for Calgary-Lougheed in those years. Prior to entering provincial politics, Mr. Kenney served in various cabinet portfolios under Prime Minister Stephen Harper from 2006 to 2015. Most notably, as Minister of Immigration, where his substantive reforms led to Canada's immigration system being one of the best in the world. That was then.
Yeah.
Okay, let us now begin. Be it resolved, the West should stay in Canada. Arguing against the resolution, Mr. Keith Wilson, the floor is yours for 10 minutes. Keith.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming. When you do that, you cut into my time, and I want to win. So let me share with you why it is that I believe Alberta should become independent, and why I'm doing what I'm doing and speaking in favor of it, not just here, but everywhere else, is that when I look at the situation we have today in Alberta, I look at our history, and I look at our place in Canada, in North America, and in the world. And when I look at the resources that we're blessed with, the people that we're blessed with, the culture that we're blessed with, I conclude that by every single objective measure that I can think of, and I've asked myself and reflected on this a lot, is will my kids, will my grandkids, and will my neighbors be better off in an independent Alberta or by staying in Canada? And every time I run that calculation, I always come back to the same conclusion. So that's one vision. The other thing that I see is the path that Canada is on. Frankly, it's dark in my view. We see reckless spending. The Trudeau and Carney governments have racked up more debt than every other government combined. We're talking about debt servicing hitting $80 billion. We have policies, two-tier justice system, out of control immigration. We have policies coming from Ottawa that frankly are authoritarian in nature, especially when you look at their censorship. And I see the plight of the younger generation. I see how they're choosing not to have children because they can't afford it, or they feel they can't. They can't afford housing. This is a serious situation. I'm seeing the inflation, how all those workers I saw when I was walking over doing construction, how each month their money becomes worth less. And I go, holy smokes, this is not good. We have a choice. And I think some of the things that Jason and I agree on is that there's serious problems in Canada. We might disagree on what the specific problems are or whether certain issues are in fact a problem.
Probably not.
But what I'm going to suggest to you is that the challenge I believe Jason has, respectfully, and those who are federalists, is they have no plan. There's just simply no way in our constitutional framework, the way Canada is structured democratically, for Canada to be fixed. You know, we've had the Meech Lake failed, Charlottetown failed, equalization referendum passed by then Premier Kennedy. and Ottawa didn't even pick up the phone. So we have a constitutional amendment formula that's impossible to meet. It's only going to be amended if we propose something that Quebec sees as not in its interest. And I don't begrudge them for that. They've got the power. They may as well use it. So I just do not see any pathway forward where the legitimate concerns and the disconnect between Alberta and Central Canada and even some of the other provinces can be mended. I see no one has yet from the Federalist side offered any viable plan to change things. What's unique about Canada is we have the 1998 Quebec succession reference case where the Supreme Court of Canada laid out a legal pathway for a province to vote on a referendum on a clear question in a clear majority to create a binding obligation, positive legal duty for good faith negotiations for the people in that province to have exercised their political free will and their right to self-determination. What a Canadian thing, eh? Now, so when I look at all of the challenges and all of the tactics and the efforts that have been made, you know, we had the West wants in. You know, we've tried loyalty, we've tried patience, we've tried to reform the Alberta. We helped elect Brian Mulroney. We created the reform movement. The West helped elect Stephen Harper. And we sent Jason Kenney to Ottawa as part of that project. And we're told, send the right people, make the right arguments, build the right condition, and the right coalitions, and Confederation will work. Well, it's been proven wrong time and time again. So we have so much going for us. You know, we have the third largest reserve of oil in the world. We have a young entrepreneurial workforce. 90% of our trade is with the largest economy in the world that is right on our border, closest to us. We've all seen countries from far afield come with gifts to President Trump to try and get a little bit of access to that market. And what an opportunity. Meanwhile, we have Prime Minister Carney saying our relationship with the United States has come to an end or something to that effect, and let's embrace Europe. So we've got so much going for us. We have a larger economy than New Zealand, Finland, Portugal, Greece, Hungary, Kuwait, Qatar, Iceland, Luxembourg, and I could keep going. Over 100 sovereign nations. We have a situation where we've contributed over $700 billion in net fiscal transfers to Ottawa, and Alberta receives roughly 65 cents back from Ottawa for every dollar we spend or send to them. And we have a diversified economy. It's not all just oil and gas. We're blessed with that third largest reserve of oil and gas in the world. So my conclusion is that Canada is no longer an optimal size of governance, but Alberta is. We have what it takes to go on our own. And I'm not talking about carving out Alberta and bringing in dollies and trucks and moving it away. We can continue to have excellent neighbors in Canada, but we'll be able to negotiate with them from a position of strength, and we will be able to move away from effectively being a colony of Ottawa that dictates to us and causes us to say, sir, please may I work a little bit harder so I can give you more. And that's the situation we've been in, and the MOU is a manifestation of that. So my view is the right thing for the future, to follow the legal pathway, a legal process for Alberta to become independent and redefine its relationship with Canada. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. And now arguing for the resolution, be it resolved, the West should stay in Canada, the Honourable Jason Kenney. The floor is yours for 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mark. To you and to the Aristotle Foundation for the brilliant work that you do to defend the institutions, the virtues, and the history that built this country and made it one of the greatest places on earth. Thank you as well to Keith for his many years of advocacy on important issues like property rights and for engaging in these debates and thoughtfully and in good faith. Let me begin by saying that, drawing from Scripture, which says that man liveth not by bread alone. I don't believe that a country is simply a balance sheet or a economic calculus. It is something much deeper. It is embedded in our citizenship as Canadians is a set of reciprocal loyalties. And I'm old-fashioned about believing in the old virtues like loyalty, like patriotism, like love of country, which means respecting those who have gone before us, who made sacrifices to build what we have inherited, and indeed a reciprocal obligation to pass those advantages on to future generations. And also a sense of awe and caution, of prudence about the institutions that we have inherited. One of my favorite authors is G.K. Chesterton, and I reflect on his famous parable, with the parable of Chesterton's fence, which is the notion that you ought to be very careful before you tear down a fence and first need to understand why it was built in the first place. I confess, a conservative, which means that I believe in having reverence for the institutions that we inherit and not recklessly tearing them down, but rather building things up and reforming them. And I think that's what we as Albertans are called to do. I believe we have a unique vocation in Canada, which is to lead and not leave. In fact, I believe Alberta is the most Canadian of provinces because we have been by far the biggest recipients, and I would say beneficiaries of interprovincial migration. More people in Alberta have been born in other provinces than is the case in any other part of Canada. Indeed, nearly half of people in this province are born elsewhere. They're Albertans by choice and not chance. And for so many of those Albertans, their primary loyalty, while they love Alberta and are proud of it and want it to thrive and prosper, their primary loyalty is to our country, to Canada. They reflect that, every year on Memorial Drive in November, hundreds of volunteers go out in the cold and pound into frozen soil 3,300 crosses representing the fallen who died for Canada in the wars of the last century, who lie below tombstones marked by the maple leaf. Those are the sacrifices which we have inherited. And I submit we need to be reverent about those sacrifices and very careful before we destroy what they defended. Now, let me say that the Federation, the Canadian Federation, is not perfect. Yes, Keith is absolutely right. And I've made the case in my years in Ottawa and certainly as a provincial leader, that in many ways that the Federation treats Alberta, in particular in the West in general, unfairly. That's a fact of history, it's undeniable. But what have we done? First of all, there's no country in the world that's perfect. There's no region anywhere in the world that feels like it gets a perfectly fair deal from, let's say, a federal system of government. So the challenge that we've always faced, and I think we've succeeded at as Albertans, is to put our shoulder behind the wheel, to fight for fairness, to fight for reform, to fight for a better deal. Those who went before us did exactly that in the first years of the last century in fighting to carve Saskatchewan and Alberta out of the Northwest Territories, to have sovereign provinces as members of the Canadian Federation with their own jurisdiction. And indeed, Premier Brownlee did that in 1930 by fighting successfully for the Natural Resource Transfer Agreement, which gave to the Western provinces full control of their mineral resources, which proved to be critically important. We fought to get through the Great Depression, and we did so with the help of the rest of Canada when we went bankrupt and defaulted on our debt in 1936. We, under the leadership of Ernst Manning and others, developed the remarkable oil and gas industry in this province after Leduc in 1947, and we won the powers to do so. Under Premier Lougheed, we fought for and won Section 92(1)A in the 1982 Constitution Act, full provincial control over the regulation of the development of natural resources. And Section 33, which guaranteed continued parliamentary supremacy in our constitutional order. And we continue to fight through the years. We Albertans have fought for federal governments that reflect our values and interests, as we did in the Harper years. I don't recall many people at all, advocating for separation when we had Stephen Harper in his government, of which I was proud to be a member. Establishing marketing freedom for prairie farmers by eliminating the wheat board monopoly, or eliminating the long gum registry, or appointing Alberta's elected senators, or restoring full per capita transfers for Canada Health transfers to Alberta, or any other of our priorities. We worked constructively within the Federation to elect a national government that agreed with us on these things. Quite frankly, we did that even during the Chrétien years, with very few MPs from Alberta. The Chrétien government, let us not forget, approved and incentivized all of the major oil sands projects, which took our oil production from less than 2 million barrels a day to 5.5 million barrels a day today. I continued to fight as Premier to ensure the completion of the Trans Mountain expansion, which has been a game changer for our products and our exports, in creating coalitions across the Federation to challenge the unconstitutionality of the Federal Impact Assessment Act, Bill C-69, and we won at the Supreme Court of Canada on that. We won in our constitutional challenge against the federal plastics ban. We won in our challenge of the Emergencies Act at the federal court. With a trifecta of winning on those issues. We've won the battle of public opinion in the rest of Canada about the need for increased oil and gas production and pipelines. Super majorities in every province, including British Columbia and Quebec, support pipelines, LNG, and increased energy production. And our current Premier has won in this Memorandum of Understanding in a commitment of the federal government to build another West Coast pipeline, to repeal the emissions cap, to repeal the clean electricity standard. We won in getting elimination of the retail carbon tax. We won in getting equivalency agreements for methane regulations, reducing the costs on Alberta industry. We won in getting a commitment to accelerated approvals. We're going to win with TMX optimization, which will be another 300,000 or 400,000 barrels a day of coastal exports. I believe if we put our shoulder to the wheel, we'll win with a version of Keystone XL to increase shipments to the United States.
30 seconds.
And so I think we as Canadians need to take yes for an answer. As Albertans, we need to be willing to take yes for an answer. I'm at
Sorry,
7.
2 minutes. I miscalculated.
Thank you.
My bad.
I'm 7.
2.5 minutes.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
So I think we need to be able to take yes for an answer. Does that make things perfect? No. But what is the alternative? Going into a spiral of a massively divisive debate and uncertainty that risks so much of what we have achieved. First of all, a referendum to have another referendum, and then we have that referendum. And let's say a majority vote to separate. Then we begin complicated multi-year negotiations over everything from currency to citizenship to debt allocation to CPP to how to build a military to how to get access to trade agreements in Canada and around the world that we will lose, to First Nations who refuse to acknowledge this whole process, taking constructive relations with Alberta First Nations, turning it upside down, and inviting the possibility of dozens of OCA-style conflicts across our province. In a province where 50% of Albertans say they would leave if this province votes to secede. I don't believe that number is possible because they would lose so much of the value of their homes, but that's the level of dislocation, the massive investor uncertainty that all of this would create. The lack of coastal access. Forget about a coastal pipeline. The separatists say, oh, we'll get the UN to build one for us. The same people who are afraid of globalists want to invite the UN peacekeepers into northern British Columbia to construct a pipeline. They say then we'll blockade our rail and our roads. That means no imports and no exports. It means massive uncertainty. All of that to lead to what? Eventually, a series of constitutional amendments to give effect to those negotiations, amendments that would, as Keith said, never be approved. And so what is the alternative? A unilateral declaration of independence for an independent landlocked statelet that is in a political war with the First Nations? Good luck. So folks, instead of launching ourselves into years of a painful economic spiral of look what they did in Quebec. Be careful what you ask for. When Quebec started down this road, it ended up becoming one of the poorest jurisdictions in North America. There's a reason why we are one of the wealthiest jurisdictions in North America. It's because we know how to build, we know how to work towards the future, we know how to create alliances, we know how to be great Albertans and great Canadians at the same time. Let's lead, not leave.
Okay, thank you, Jason. I'm a Luddite when it comes to devices.
I've had my own clock going there, Mark. You just about...
Thank you, but you pivoted quite well, Jason. Thank you. So, because of my mistake. So thank you both. And now, rebuttals, 2 minutes each. Let's go back to Keith with your rebuttal.
Fight, fight, fight is what you heard. Now, hang on. I don't want you to applaud for this, because let me put it in context. Why is it that a province with people that work as hard as we do in Alberta, that contribute and send so much to Ottawa every year, why is it when we are blessed with the third largest reserve of oil and gas in the world that we can safely deliver around the world, and equally important to the largest customer in the world right across our border, when we send all that money to Ottawa, the role we have in Confederation, why is it that we're always having to fight for things? Why are we always having to go and beg? It makes no sense. I'm certain if a Martian came down and you explained what was going on here, he'd go, don't you have line 9 that supplies most of the oil and gas to Ontario and Quebec? Yeah, and then the TMX to Vancouver. What are you doing? Why are you always on your knees begging? Why are you always in court? And when you're in court, because anybody got a plastic straw right now? Anybody got a plastic bag from Safeway? No, because Ottawa ignores the court rulings. They don't care. And my friend points out about be careful before you tear down the fence. And he also points out about the institution, the glory of the institutions. Canada's institutions, with all due respect, are corrupt. And we've all witnessed it. We've all witnessed it. And it's tragic and it's sad. And you know whose hearts bleed the most when they see it? The veterans. Because that's not what they fought for. That's not what they fought for at all. The Canada that exists today is not the Canada they fought for. And the reality is, bankruptcy in 1936. Alberta ain't going bankrupt. Ottawa is, we need to separate from them. When you're told to be careful about what you tear down that fence, the truth of the matter, the sad truth of the matter is that fence that Mr. Kenney describes is laying on the ground, rotting, and we need to build a new one for us.
Thank you, Keith. And now, Keith went over a little bit. We'll give Mr. Kenney 2 minutes, and we'll give you 2:30 because Keith went over.
So let's say Albertans vote majority yes this October to begin the process of another referendum, and then a majority of that referendum vote yes in that referendum. The very next day, you have 47 First Nations that say they refuse to recognize the process, that come hell or high water, they are going to stay part of Canada because they refuse to recognize that the agreement they signed with the Crown and Right of Canada can be transferred to a new Republic of Alberta. You may not like their position, but that is their position. It's their position in law, and it's a position that they will enforce. They will enforce, I fear, in that scenario, through massive civil disobedience, taking a peaceful and productive relationship that we have where almost all of our First Nations are commercially involved in the oil and gas industry, turning it upside down. Also, the next day, the Edmonton City Council and probably Calgary vote overwhelmingly to not to refuse to cooperate with any effort at Alberta separation, so you have partition. If Canada is severable, and Alberta is a creation of federal statute, so too is Alberta severable through municipalities that are creatures of provincial statute. So now you have basically a political civil war happening in the province. You have half the population that say they would intend to leave, crashing housing prices. Who's going to allocate capital to build the oil and gas industry about which Keith speaks in that context? You have, this is, in my view, extremely dangerous stuff. And so what do you end up with? By the way, who's going to negotiate this? A provincial government whose premier and cabinet say they are committed to a loyal Canada, to national unity? Are they going to negotiate these new arrangements? Well, who is? Mitch Sylvester, who's afraid that the king is going to execute him? What are we talking about? Is this how we launch a serious discussion about our future? My point is, in our history, we have fought for and won greater powers. How about we exercise the powers that we already have? Why are we talking about separating when we don't even exercise the full ambit of our current constitutional powers, like Quebec does, with its own provincial pension plan and its own provincial police? So you don't have to beg to do that. You just have to do it. How about we create those facts? Assert ourselves in those areas. I try to get the ball rolling on provincial police and pensions. Let's actually do it to demonstrate that we can be more powerful as masters of our own destiny while maintaining the stability and advantages of being part of the Canadian market, of our free trade access, as opposed to going into a multi-year downward spiral of internal division that will impoverish this province.
Thank you. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Keith. That was spirited, as we expected, nothing less. Now, 30 minutes of questions from me to each one of you. I have unique questions for each one of you, as you both know. You will have 2 minutes to answer. We'll try and do that. And if the other debater wishes to respond, you don't have to, but if you want to, you will have 1 minute to respond. I will alternate between you both. Let's start with Keith. Keith, Western frustration is driven by an imbalance in the House of Commons. However, part of it is driven by the imbalance in the House of Commons. However, Statistics Canada recently projected provincial population shares out to 2050, and in fact 2075. But let's go to 2050. By that year, Quebec's share of the population of the country may hit a low of 18%, down from 27% in the 1980 referendum, and down from about 21% now. Alberta, at 12% now, may be 16% of Canada in 2050. Almost near Quebec at 18%. And if Daniel Smith takes the ideas that I and others gave many years ago in the flat tax and reintroduces that, maybe we'll be equal to Quebec by 2050. And the West as a whole may represent 36% of Canada's population by 2050, so double that of Quebec in that scenario. That means more Western seats in the House of Commons as it's reapportioned, and you get more politicians, like it or not, in the House of Commons every 10 years. So the West could have a significant clout, double that of Quebec by 2050. So my question is this. I grant that wait 24 years is not a compelling response to Western frustrations. However, why should the West, which has been growing in wealth, power, and influence, including Alberta, which may equal Quebec or be near to it by 2050, throw away its growing clout on a separatist gamble? Keith.
Well, I don't know that we have growing clout. I think we have some political gestures. But I don't think, and I have not thought for a long time, that 4 more seats in the House of Commons would solve the problem that faces the future of our province and the future for our kids and grandkids. I've come to the conclusion that the problem's much deeper in Canada, that the structure of confederation is a failed experiment. And what I mean by that is I think Canada is too large to be an optimal unit of government. We have regionally diverse economies. We have regionally diverse cultures. Have you met somebody from Vancouver Island and then met someone from Newfoundland, right? And then met an Albertan in between. It's my view that it's not an optimal size, and it's not a matter of reallocating seats. Our economies are different. Our cultures are different. Albertans, in my view, have a very unique culture. We have a hardworking culture. We don't want governments to tell us what to do. We want governments to get out of the way. We want to take risk. And so I think tweaking representation doesn't solve it. It's not an optimal size. But Alberta is. We are an absolutely optimal size when you look at our geography, our land mass, what we're blessed with, our people, our diversified economy, our access to markets. So I just think every time I look at this, the conclusion I come to is Alberta needs to exercise a legal pathway to independence.
Jason, would you like to respond?
Well, I think part of the answer is that we continue to grow faster than any other part of the country, and so our share of representation in the House of Commons grows along with that. But Keith is right. We're not we can't snap our fingers and end representation by population in Canada. But let's be careful of one thing. When you talk about underrepresentation, the areas of Canada that are overrepresented are rural areas, including rural Alberta. And the core of support for separation comes from rural areas. If the call is for strict representation by population, that means fewer rural seats representing agricultural and other regional and rural concerns. I don't think that rep by population is actually what the separatists are looking for, because they're not looking to reduce the number of rural Alberta seats. I will say that the solution is for us never to allow ourselves to become isolated, but always to build alliances across the Federation. And, we have the Ontario government that's passed a law to facilitate the construction of oil and gas pipelines. The Quebec government is now changing its position and open to LNG and pipelines. And we hope to have a change in the government in British Columbia. But ultimately, instead of wasting resources on a huge internal political civil war, I think, as an Albertan, that we should focus those resources on changing the federal government, because even though we only had 34 seats from Alberta when Stephen Harper was in office, we had a government that was sensitive to the concerns of the West, as quite frankly we did, I would argue, in many issues with the Chrétien government. It's not impossible for us to make our case across the Federation and win. We have on so many occasions through our history.
Okay, thank you. So a question for you, to which Keith can respond. Jason, territories do split peacefully. Czechoslovakia split into the Czech Republic and Slovakia. Singapore left Malaysia. And in terms of landlocked countries, if we're talking about a potential separate Alberta, and not the West, but a separate Alberta, Switzerland is landlocked, and it's one of the most prosperous civilized countries on the planet. So question, why the assumption that an independent state, landlocked or not, if we're talking about the West or specific to Alberta, landlocked, would be akin to some post-independence country with strife and not Switzerland?
Well, in terms of Slovakia and Czech Republic, it's worth noting that in their separation, you couldn't hold dual citizenship, and that would be the case here in Alberta. I heard a big cheer for unilateral declaration of independence. The next day, Ottawa cancels your Canadian passport. Good luck getting to the United States. The next day, IATA no longer recognizes international flights out of Alberta. Good luck flying out of Alberta. You think that's wonderful? That's worth cheering, is it? If you make a unilateral declaration of independence. In terms of Switzerland, there's no comparison between the Swiss and the Alberta economies. They're almost entirely a services economy. All they export is chocolate and luxury watches. We are a commodities, natural resources economy. And good luck as a landlocked statelet trying to ship commodities like oil and gas and grain and oil seeds and lumber and minerals to the rest of Canada, to the West Coast. Don't forget, who owns Trans Mountain? The Government of Canada. If we do a UDI with a non-negotiated settlement, they shut that down overnight. Any construction on a de novo West Coast pipeline shut down overnight. Some people say, don't worry, we'll just build something to the West Coast of the United States. Have you checked the regulations on shipping heavy oil out of the blue states of Oregon, Washington, and California? I'm sorry, not possible. Actually, the Port of Vancouver is more accessible for exports of things like thermal coal than the U.S. West Coast states are. So we become a landlocked statelet as a resource commodity producing exporting jurisdiction. It would be the single most dramatic act of economic suicide in modern history.
Just as a...
So 1 minute, Keith, would you like to respond?
Point of order. Wasn't it supposed to be 2-2, then 1-1?
Did I mess that up already?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we didn't do the rebuttal last time, but that's fine.
Okay. Proceed with your rebuttal.
So now I have 2 minutes.
We'll be creative. You can have
Jason
2 minutes.
Gets a minute again. Okay. So Alberta is not landlocked by the Rockies. We're landlocked by Ottawa. We're embargoed. We're embargoed. It's a policy landlock. And the point about we continue to grow, Imagine how much growth our economy would have happened if we didn't always have Ottawa with its knee on our neck and its hand on our wallet. So this landlocked argument also is like a distraction. Look at my hand, look at my hand. The largest economy in the world, people, 49th parallel, sweetgrass. We have the largest economy in the world that we can sell into, that we're culturally aligned with, that wants to see us succeed. Wants to see us succeed. Donald Trump has approved more pipelines to benefit Alberta than Mark Carney or the Liberals ever have. Those are facts. So the real question is not whether Alberta is landlocked. The question is why Alberta should remain policy locked by Ottawa.
I've kind of lost track of the format.
I've lost track as well. Why don't we include a response?
Rebuttal, and then I get.
All right, let's keep ripping here.
Yeah, let's rip.
It's fun.
So a 1 minute rebuttal, and then we'll go to the next question, which
Fair.
I'll ask if you.
All right.
Go ahead, Jason.
Look, there's a lot that frustrates me about Ottawa, but we are not landlocked by Ottawa. They just built a new West Coast pipeline, the Trans Mountain Expansion. They bought one, and then they built one. It never should have had to happen, but they did it. They are committed now in this MOU with the current Alberta government to build a brand new West Coast pipeline. They are expediting the second phase of LNG Canada, and I think we can expect another major LNG project. They support the idea of a new pipeline to the United States. So it's simply not true to say that they're landlocking us. But you suddenly lock us in to landlocked status. We lose TMX unless there's a negotiated settlement with Ottawa. And as I've pointed out, and as you pointed out, that requires constitutional amendments that we will never secure. Then you're back to the UDI, the Unilateral Declaration of Independence. And without Ottawa's support, they can shut down TMX, or they can prohibitively toll our exports. They shut down production of any new West Coast pipeline. The government of BC, we no longer have federal paramountcy to overcome that kind of opposition. And you take all of the First Nations in Alberta, who are generally in favor of more pipelines, and turn them against that. Keith, this is the end of any future for the Alberta oil and gas industry.
So let's talk about regaining our own control over this debate a little bit. And I want to ask a question of Keith. So you mentioned spending, Keith. Specific to Alberta on this next question. Federal spending is high, it's out of control. But look at Alberta per capita spending. Often and always, with Ralph Klein's government being the exception, Alberta has often been among the biggest of spenders among the provinces. And I grew up in British Columbia looking across the border thinking, I don't really think Alberta under the Lougheed years and then Getty was that fiscally conservative, fiscally prudent. I remember looking across the border thinking, I grew up in BC. I remember Bill Bennett. I remember the restraint program of 1979, the privatization that the Fraser Institute came up with and gave to Bill Bennett, which then spread around the world. I remember thinking, British Columbia, the political party in charge there in the 70s, in the 80s, part of both decades, was pretty good at controlling the books. I don't see that in Alberta's history. So, question is, why would an independent Alberta be any more fiscally prudent? And in fact, I should give credit where credit is due as well. Mr. Kenney's government did help bring down some per capita spending to closer to other provinces. His successor, Premier Smith, has ramped it up. So my question, Keith, why would an independent Alberta be any more fiscally conservative, fiscally prudent, than the high-spending government you got in Ottawa? You may just switch out one high-spending government in Ottawa for a high-spending government based in Edmonton.
This is an excellent illustration of why independence makes so much sense. I'm not suggesting for a minute that, with all due respect to former Premier Kenney, that that Alberta politicians are inherently fiscally wiser. But what I will suggest to you, and it's a true statement, that if Alberta's independent, those elected officials who make the spending decisions on our hard-earned money will be elected by Albertans, accountable to Albertans, and removable by Albertans. That's the difference. That's why I say the structure's not right. It's not optimal. We have to convince Ottawa not to do something, and they don't care what we think. $200 million for a spaceport that's a gravel pad? Phoenix pay system? They can't even figure out how to pay employees, and now they want to spend $4.2 billion building a new system? There's no accountability. Our voice doesn't matter. When Alberta's independent, if our politicians are misusing our tax dollars, if they're behaving recklessly and carelessly and spending $200 million on a spaceport, we can fire them.
And a response from Jason.
Well, Mark, the separatists would have us believe that if we, that we'll be land of milk and honey, with no taxes or very low taxes. We'll eliminate personal income taxes if we become a separate state. Well, the truth is this. We Albertans, and I as a fiscal conservative who did hard, heavy lifting to reduce spending by 10%, I had massive opposition to that because Albertans want the full suite social welfare state. They keep voting for it, and they keep getting it from their provincial governments of different stripes. Here's the reality. I know hardcore separatists may not like that, but that's what we keep getting out of the democratic process in Alberta. Now, you look at states like, by the way, you become a separate state, 5% GDP to become a member of NATO on defense. That's like $30 billion ticket right there. Developing our own foreign ministry, our own embassies abroad, our own trade promotion bureaucracy, our own tax collection. Every function that's performed in Ottawa then has to be recreated here. Norway, with a similar size and economy with an energy sector, spends over 50% of their GDP. Almost all of the Scandinavian states which have similar populations, similar economies to ours, spend over half of their GDP on government. So I submit taxes will inevitably go up. It will be more expensive to operate an independent state. One point I wanted to make in rebuttal to Keith about the complementarity of American political culture. He likes President Trump, apparently. Good luck selling pipelines to potential President Gavin Newsom or Kamala Harris.
Okay, thank you.
You're going to bank the future of Alberta on a guy who's going to be out of office in 2.5 years. I don't think that's a prudent move.
And now thank you, Jason. Thank you, Keith, for that, answering that question and the rebuttal. Let's go to a new question for Mr. Jason Kenney. Part of what appears to drive Western sentiment, separatist sentiment, is the notion that good faith Westerners have tried for decades to improve the West's place in Confederation. And both of you noted this in your opening remarks, or Keith did, helping elect a massive conservative government under Brian Mulroney in 1984. The creation of the West once in Reform Party in the late 80s and in the 1990s. The election of Stephen Harper's government, which you were a part of, and obviously was Western sympathetic, but still hit roadblocks in the rest of Canada. Question, let's suppose Western separatism or Alberta separatism, whichever one you want to address, fails as you predict. Given constitutional, legal, and political impediments, how would you propose to correct the imbalance in equalization, or the Senate, or the House of Commons, especially the representational floors assigned to select provinces? How would you propose to correct some of that, given some of the written-in imbalances in the Constitution?
Well, we just continue to make the case and continue to try to find allies in other provinces whose interests are aligned with our own. And I would point out, it's easy, it's cheap and easy to be cynical about all these institutions and things. But, I went to the Senate as Premier, and I made the case against C-69, the original Trudeau version of the Impact Assessment Act. I said, you're here to defend the regional interests of the regions of Canada. I said, could you imagine a federal law that would impair the aviation industry in Quebec or the hydroelectricity industry? And you know what? We got the Senate, most of whom were appointed by Justin Trudeau, to vote to gut his version of the Impact Assessment Act and to adopt all of Alberta's amendments and those of the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. And we also got the Senate to vote to kill Bill C-49, the tanker ban for the Northwest Coast. So credit where it's due. I sat down with the Trudeau appointees and I made the case and we actually persuaded them. That's what we as Albertans do. That's how we got Section 92(1)A, total provincial control over natural resources in 1982. So it's about continuing to make the case, acknowledging, as Keith has said, it is virtually impossible to amend the Constitution of Canada. But you can't separate without amending the Constitution of Canada which is a paradox, unless you go down this road of the unilateral declaration of independence. And as I say, what happens the next day when Ottawa cancels your passport? Good luck.
Keith, a response.
You're hearing a lot of fear, and you're not hearing a plan. I have an answer for each one of those things, but more importantly, there's people who are experts in each of these fields. Some of you may know that I started the Alberta Transition Council. We're working on a white paper that details exactly continuity of service for air travel, monetary policy, military, and so on. But just let me say this. I learned in my political science degree, studying the Senate, they've never stopped anything. They delayed a couple of bills. I'm sorry, it's a patronage pit. It doesn't do a single thing. You can reform it all you want. You can appear before it. It's not going to change anything. This issue about First Nations, you know, in 1850, the Robinson Treaties were entered into in Northern Ontario. They were entered into with a different government, Britain. And then in 1867, those treaties in the land's jurisdiction changed to the government of Canada. In Alberta, the 1930s Natural Resources Transfer Agreement did the same thing. We have multiple instances in our constitutional history where the jurisdiction for the land changes, the governance changes, and the treaty rights are maintained and respected. And under the Constitution, the First Nations have a right to be at that table. But one last point is 92(1)(a). Think about some of the things Mr. Kenney said about TMX and other things. How did former Premier Lougheed get the attention of Ottawa and get them to not only pick up the phone, but have a constitutional meeting? He did it by announcing that the Alberta government would curtail the capacity of Line 9 to Ontario and Quebec to 85% of its capacity. We have strength. We need to stop begging. We need to be fair, and we can get a respectful relationship with Canada, and we can be our own country.
If you can respond in 30 seconds.
Thank you for making my point, Keith. You know what Peter Lougheed did not do? He did not advocate or play with separatism. He fought the separatists. He fought the Western Canada Concept Party, a movement that in its 50 years of existence has only ever won one riding in Western Canada. That was in 1982 at the height of the National Energy Program. You know, he did it by demonstrating strength as an Alberta Premier. And just as our current Premier has in getting this Memorandum of Understanding. And so, you know, Keith, the reality is that my point is the Senate agreed with us on C-49 and C-69 and C-48. Unfortunately, the Trudeau government reverted on that, which is why you have to win allies in the House of Commons, which is what we did during the Harper years, which is what we can do again. But by the way, if we go into this spiral of massive division and uncertainty, the only political winner will be the Liberal Party of Canada. Right now, the Liberals are polling at or above 40% in this province, I believe in part because of the fear created by the secessionist movement and a rally around the flag effect, which Mark Carney benefited from contra Donald Trump. And provincially, this movement is going to split the governing Conservative Party right down the middle. If this carries on, electing the NDP. I don't see how Alberta is stronger with more Liberals from Alberta in Ottawa and Naheed Nenshi as Premier.
Since we gave you a chance to respond, we're going to move on. Keith, would you like to respond to that?
Albertans who are concerned and support independence understand we're at an existential moment. They understand that this is a rare moment in time of convergence of opportunity and convergence of threat. If we're not successful with independence, we know there's likely to be a split in the UCP and the NDP is likely to be the next government. That's just a reality. So that's why I and many others are going to work really, really hard to convince those who are not yet ready to support independence that now is the time. It's absolutely viable. Respectfully, all the other sides got is fear. They have no plan. It's always go back and ask for more. Be patient. Patience is not a solution to the opportunity that's before us.
Okay, thank you, Keith. Okay, we are nearing the end of this 30-minute session. We may be over. I've lost track of the time, and that's okay. I'd like to do this. I'd like to ask both of you gentlemen the same question, but I'll start with the thoughts that prompt the question. When the separatists in Quebec came to fore, the strongest voice against Quebec nationalists was Pierre Trudeau, and yet he still won seats in the province of Quebec. But he disparaged Quebec separatists and their ethno-nationalistic agenda and their linguistic agenda. And his government anyway won large majorities of seats in that province. That's almost a question for, well, it's a question for both of you, but also in terms of the separatist dynamic out there today. If you look back, of course, the Quebec separatists had a very dynamic figure in the case of René Lévesque. And with due respect to the supporters of separatism in this room, or yourself, Keith, I don't see a René Lévesque figure in Western Canada at this point, or in Alberta in particular. Also, isn't there a possibility that you do see a separatist, and this is, to put the question also, that's for Keith, let's give one for Jason here. Don't you end up with a potential, though, if you get a separatist figure, you've not downplayed, you're skeptical a little bit about the strength of separatist sentiment in the West and in Alberta. But what happens if you get a René Lévesque figure? And Keith, what happens if you do end up provoking a Captain Canada response, as Jason has alluded to in the polls, and you get more Liberals, which are not your party, elected in Alberta? So for both of you, aren't there dynamics that you're both not considering? And in particular, Keith is in the separatist movement, doesn't yet have a René Lévesque figure in Alberta or in the West in general. And Jason, on your side of things, isn't this a danger for a federalist such as yourself that maybe has not been fully considered? Why don't we start with Jason this time and then to Keith. 3 minutes each on this one. There was a lot there.
Yeah, well, look, I can't really comment on some hypothetical scenario, but I will say this, that the Alberta separation movement has nothing in common with Quebec separatism. I'm opposed to Quebec separatism, but it is a serious movement. That is 70, like, first of all, it represents a 400 years of French-Canadian identity and continuity as a linguistic, ethnic, and formerly religious minority in North America. So it's a question of soul and not just balance sheet that motivates them. Secondly, they've spent 70 years thinking through this stuff, winning multiple governments with credible leaders who have thought through all of these issues. But we are now 150 days away from a referendum that could throw us into a period of years of chaos and division. And Keith is telling us, wait, don't worry, I've got a group that's coming up with a white paper on some of these issues shortly. That can't be taken seriously. There is no plan for any of these issues. I mean, this is a movement. Let's go back to the 2021 election, at the height of Justin Trudeau's unpopularity. The Maverick Party was able to only field 29 candidates in all of Western Canada, and they got 25,000 votes, less than 1,000 votes per riding contested. That's how marginal this movement was 5 minutes ago. Now we have a lot of Albertans who say, well, we know we're not going to separate. We know these guys are not going to get a majority, but let's use this to send a message. Let's replicate Quebec's knife to the throat strategy. And my view is, be careful what you ask for. François Legault told me the reason he went from being a PQ minister, a hardcore separatist, to leading a federalist party is because he realized for 6 decades, Quebec wasted its political energy and that of its elites, focused on an internal political civil war instead of growing their economy and focusing on prosperity. He said that's why we became one of the lowest per capita GDPs in North America, with one of the highest levels of tax and debt. His message to me is, why would you replicate in Alberta what we failed at in Quebec, which was turning in on ourselves and wasting our resources, our time and our energy on this internal dispute, as opposed to focusing on growth and productivity. I say, yes, we should learn the lesson from Quebec, which is not to go down that road, which leads to nothing but a lack of investor confidence and demoralization of our society.
Keith, before you answer, and then your answer will be the final one, and then we'll go to the final statements. But let me rephrase the question, just so it's clear, given there was a lot in there. Aren't you underestimating, Keith, the potential of Jason Kenney or someone else, or even Mark Carney, to win for the Federalists in Alberta in a way that Pierre Trudeau did when he opposed Quebec separatism? Aren't you potentially underestimating that?
I have great confidence in the wisdom of the crowd of Albertans. And I believe increasingly Albertans are waking up to the value of their worth, what we offer Canada, And the simple fact is we can be better off on our own. And I think the situation in Quebec is illustrative of my point that Canada is not an optimal unit of government anymore. It's a failed experiment. We have distinct economies and we have distinct cultures. And the fear-mongering about businesses will leave, the businesses that left Quebec left in 1977 and 78, way before a referendum, because of the strict English language laws that changed the entirety of the workforce, so the banks left. But an oil sands plant can't leave. Petrochemical plants can't leave. The oil and gas isn't going anywhere. Our beautiful Rocky Mountains are not going anywhere. The idea of suggesting that the challenges that Quebec faced after the referendum or leading up to the referendum is a cartoon version of history. It has no basis in fact. Alberta's different. We have a pathway. More and more Albertans are going to see it. The real risk is staying in Canada.
Okay. On a side note, as a British Columbian, I always thought the Rocky Mountains you have here in Alberta were kind of stolen from my home province. So I may advocate for the return to British Columbia. All right, gentlemen, it's now time.
I think we could agree that we should at least have the whole peace country on this side of the border, right?
Deal.
It's been a challenge tonight, but it's been fun. Gentlemen, it's now time for your closing statements. We will begin with Mr. Keith Wilson, and then Jason Kenney will have the last word, reversing the order that we started with tonight. So, Keith, 5 minutes. So sorry, we're going to Keith and then to Jason is what I'm saying, yes. So.
No, that's okay. I'm fine with this. This was agreed to earlier.
Yeah.
But thank you for sticking up with me. I appreciate your help. I was feeling a little vulnerable up here. So I'm concerned I'm going to repeat myself. So I'm going to say this. We can be good neighbors within Canada without being governed by Canada. We can be honest that Alberta has outgrown Canada. And the question is no longer whether Alberta is strong enough to stand on its own. The question is whether Alberta is finally confident enough to move towards a lawful path of independence. Thank you.
That was not 5 minutes. You have 5 minutes if you'd like it.
Oh, okay. Well, let me use some of that time then to rebut a couple of points that Keith has made.
I didn't agree to that part.
Well, I can use my closing.
You had 5 minutes
Yeah, 5
each.
minutes. Oh,
you
yeah,
had 5
it's
minutes
fine.
each.
Yeah.
Keith, if you want to take more time after me, you're welcome to claim back some of your time. So Keith has talked about, don't worry about the First Nations. It's all going to be fine. They can just reassign the Crown's Treaty. We can reassign the Crown's Treaty obligations to the Republic of Alberta, whatever it is. There's one small problem. They refuse to accept that view. They are absolutely clear. Every single one of the 47 First Nations rights holders, treaty signatories in the province, have been patently clear that they refuse to even consider a reassignment of their counterparty under the treaties. So they don't. And you can't do it unilaterally. You can't impose it on them. That's why we had that court decision, which I think was mistaken on law. But that's why they will refuse to cooperate with something called the Republic of Alberta. Keith has not even responded to the problem of partition. As I said, if Canada is severable, so too is Alberta. So how are you going to deal? Inevitably, if you have a vote, Edmonton overwhelmingly is going to vote to stay in Canada. I believe Calgary will too. So you've got the two biggest cities of the province representing 3.5 million people saying that they're not going anywhere. What kind of state do you have made out of that? Plus the 47 First Nations, plus probably other communities that will petition to stay in Canada. And then what happens when you have a majority of people turn around and say, no, we didn't mean to go into this spiral of division and the economic costs and the conflict with Indigenous people and the partition. We want to have another referendum. If one referendum can affect separation, then why can't another reverse it? So you just create endless uncertainty. Now, yes, the Federation has been unfair to Alberta, pardon me. And yes, Justin Trudeau was a terrible prime minister, I think, for this country and for this province. Yes, he created enormous divisions. We can all agree on that in this room. But much, not all, but much of the damage that he did is being reversed thanks in part to the pressure from Alberta. The elimination of the retail carbon tax, the elimination of the emissions cap in Alberta, the elimination of the clean electricity standards, and so much more. I think credit where it's due. The provincial government has effectively made its case on these and other issues. So why would we take the risk of going into this endless multi-year process of massive division, of people leaving our province instead of coming here? Now, Keith talks you can't move a petrochemical plant. I'm the guy who negotiated the $12 billion investment on behalf of Dow Chemicals in their ethane cracker in Edmonton. And I can tell you, Keith, they wouldn't have even answered my call if Alberta was in the middle, if they didn't know which jurisdiction they would be dealing with. So you can't move a petrochemical plant, but you sure as hell can't attract tens of billions of dollars of new capital into a jurisdiction characterized by massive uncertainty. So I say, let's continue to lead, not leave. Let's put our resources into trying to elect a federal government that's even more aligned with our interests. Let's take yes for an answer on this new West Coast pipeline. Let's pursue TMX optimization. Let's pursue a southbound new pipeline. Let's get these major LNG projects built. Let's continue to attract new people to this province so that we can increase our population and our strength in the Federation. Let's exercise those constitutional powers that we have that we do not yet exercise around things like police and pensions. I would say let's be more fiscally responsible so we can re-enhance the fiscal advantage to incentivize growth in this province. Let's make allies and let's leverage that supermajority we have in popular support for oil and gas pipelines and increase production of what we produce. And finally, I say, let's be true to the memory of those people who we honor on Memorial Drive on Remembrance Week. Let's remember that they lie under those maple leaves in foreign soil. Let's not be so quick to diminish the sacrifices of those generations of proud Albertans, also proud Canadians, who have built one of the most prosperous, generous, and thoughtful places on the face of the earth. We owe it to them, just as we owe it to the future, to build this province and this country as strong Alberta in a strong Canada.
Okay. Now, Jason, you did offer Keith a chance to respond with a few. Did you want to respond? And
Sure.
then we will end it there and go to some closing thoughts here.
What you're hearing is no plan. What you're hearing is fear, and what you're hearing is emotion. Those veterans that died did not fight for the values that Ottawa is seeking to impose on us, the censorship. And literally trampling on our rights. So $1 trillion in investment has left. I am confident, as are people in the investment community that I speak with, that if Alberta moves towards independence, they know they won't have the obstacle of Bill C-69, net zero, and all of this other ideological extremist policy imposed on us by Ottawa, and we won't have to convince Ottawa to change the law. We'll be able to do it ourselves.
Okay. So that ends that portion of the debate. And to Keith's point, there's been a lot of emotion in this room, so I don't think it's just on one side. Thank you all. Let me do this now. I want to thank you both. Let's give them a round of applause once again. And before we leave tonight, I'll leave you with some thoughts from two Canadian Prime Ministers that I think hopefully we can all agree with in terms of their view of what Canada was and should be again. Two quotes about Canada, because regardless of your positions here tonight, up front, in the audience, or online when you view this, these two statements point to the kind of Canada we once had, and for those of us who are federalists, which should be renewed, but should be existing the world over. These two gentlemen offered invocations of freedom, but also implicitly notions of responsibility. Self-government in its broadest sense has always assumed citizens who govern themselves responsibly first. So first, from his 1894 campaign stop in Winnipeg, this then opposition leader opposed the Conservative government's protectionist policies, and he did so by emphasizing what he argued were classic Canadian ideas and ideals, in which were deeply part of our national identity. The good Saxon word freedom, freedom in every sense of the term, freedom of speech, freedom of action, freedom in religious life and civil life, and last but not least, freedom in commercial life. The speaker of those words, it was Liberal opposition leader, Sir Wilfrid Laurier, now Sir Wilfrid Laurier, who became Canada's 7th Prime Minister in 1896. The second statesman, I am a Canadian, free to speak without fear, free to worship God in my own way, free to stand for what I think is right, free to oppose what I believe wrong, free to choose those who shall govern my country. This heritage of freedom I pledge to uphold for myself and for all mankind. That was the Right Honourable John G. Diefenbaker, Canada's 13th Prime Minister. Thus, with reminders from statesmen who understood our founding ideals and principles, and which should be freedoms that spread the entire world wide, thank you all and good night.